Picture this. You're digging through ancient rock layers in a Colombian coal mine when suddenly you uncover a bone so massive it stops you dead in your tracks. This isn't just any bone. It's thicker than your wrist, heavier than anything you've ever seen, and it belongs to something that should be impossible. What you've just discovered will rewrite everything we thought we knew about the limits of life on Earth. This is the story of Titanoboa, and absolutely nothing about this creature was normal. Before we dive into this prehistoric nightmare, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories about Earth's most extraordinary creatures. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Back in 2009, a team of scientists was working in the Cerrejón coal mine in northern Colombia, carefully extracting fossils from rock formations that were roughly 60 million years old. These weren't just any rocks. They contained the perfectly preserved remains of an entire ancient rainforest ecosystem, complete with leaves, fish, turtles, and countless other specimens from a world that existed just after the dinosaurs disappeared. But then they found something that made them question everything they thought they knew about prehistoric life. A single vertebra, massive beyond belief, emerged from the ancient sediment. At first glance, the logical assumption was that it belonged to a crocodile. After all, crocodilians were the undisputed giants of those primordial swamps, and finding enormous reptile bones in tropical rock formations wasn't entirely unexpected. However, something felt wrong. The shape was off. The curves didn't match what researchers had cataloged from countless crocodile specimens over the years. As they examined the bone more carefully, the shocking truth became undeniable. This wasn't from a crocodile at all. This vertebra belonged to a snake. Not just any snake, but the largest serpent that had ever existed on our planet. What they had discovered was Titanoboa, a creature so enormous that it instantly redefined what we thought was biologically possible. The Cerrejón site isn't just another fossil location. It's essentially a time machine, offering us a complete snapshot of a Paleocene rainforest that was suddenly buried and preserved in extraordinary detail by mud and volcanic ash millions of years ago. As the excavation continued and more vertebrae were uncovered, along with ribs and associated fauna, the full scope of their discovery became clear. This wasn't a fluke or some kind of measurement error. The fossils were consistent, absolutely enormous, and unlike anything in the scientific record. What emerged was a portrait of an animal so large that it completely reset our understanding of what a snake could become. When the research team first calculated the size based on these vertebrae, they ran the numbers over and over again, convinced they had made some kind of mistake. But the mathematics were undeniable. They were looking at evidence of a snake that measured over 48 feet in length. If these calculations were accurate, Titanoboa wasn't just a big snake. It was potentially the largest land predator to exist after the age of dinosaurs. The implications were staggering. A creature of this magnitude could only survive in ecosystems that were far hotter, far more productive, and far more competitive than anything scientists had previously imagined for the Paleocene period. This discovery suggested that the ancient world was pushing biological limits in ways we had never considered possible. So just how massive was this prehistoric giant? The most conservative scientific estimates place Titanoboa at approximately 42 feet in length, though some calculations suggest it could have reached over 50 feet. Its weight is estimated between 2,000 and 2,500 pounds. To put this in perspective, the largest anaconda ever reliably documented measured about 28 feet and weighed around 500 pounds. This means Titanoboa was nearly twice as long and roughly 4 to 5 times heavier than the largest modern snake. But here's where things get really fascinating from a scientific perspective. How do researchers determine the size of an extinct animal from just a handful of fossilized vertebrae? It turns out that modern snakes follow remarkably predictable scaling relationships. The dimensions of their vertebrae correlate directly with their total body length in consistent mathematical patterns. Paleontologists can measure a Titanoboa vertebra, compare those measurements to modern constrictors like boas and anacondas, and use established scaling laws to calculate backwards to determine the animal's likely size. It's an elegant solution to what might seem like an impossible puzzle. This leads us to an even more intriguing question. Why was Titanoboa so dramatically larger than any snake alive today? The answer lies in understanding the fundamental constraints that govern reptilian biology, specifically the relationship between environmental temperature and metabolic function. Snakes are ectothermic creatures, meaning they cannot regulate their own body temperature internally. They depend entirely on their environment to maintain the warmth necessary for their biological processes. This environmental dependency shapes virtually every aspect of their lives: their metabolism, growth rates, digestive efficiency, and crucially, the maximum size they can achieve. Think of it this way: the warmer the environment, the faster a snake's metabolism operates. Faster metabolism translates to accelerated growth, more efficient digestion, and the physiological capacity to sustain a much larger body mass. When scientists uncovered Titanoboa, they weren't just looking at the remains of a giant predator. They were essentially reading a biological thermometer, a climate record preserved in bone that told the story of a world far hotter than anything we experience today. If you enjoyed learning about this incredible discovery, don't forget to smash that like button and hit subscribe to join our community of curious minds exploring Earth's most amazing secrets. To truly understand Titanoboa, we need to step back approximately 58 million years into the Paleocene epoch, just a few million years after the Great Extinction event that wiped out the dinosaurs. Earth was in the midst of recovery, with ecosystems rebuilding themselves in ways that would seem almost alien to us today. Global temperatures during this period were significantly higher than anything in modern times. In what is now northern Colombia, scientific evidence suggests average year-round temperatures of at least 32 degrees Celsius, with virtually no seasonal temperature variation. Imagine a rainforest environment that never cooled down, not even during the night hours. Picture a world where the air itself felt like being in a constant sauna, with no ice caps anywhere on the planet, no winter seasons, just relentless, steaming heat stretching from pole to pole. In this superheated world, forests literally sweated with humidity. Waterways steamed visibly in the intense sunlight, and life grew to proportions that would be impossible in our current climate. For cold-blooded animals, this warmth removed the biggest constraint on their growth: metabolic limitation due to insufficient environmental heat. Interestingly, even today's tropical forests, the Amazon, the Congo Basin, Southeast Asian jungles, are actually too cool to support a snake like Titanoboa. Modern anacondas and pythons are already pushing against the upper limits of what our current climate allows. To venture beyond their size into Titanoboa territory would require a world consistently turned up several degrees warmer for millions of years. Titanoboa's massive body required that greenhouse-like heat to jumpstart its metabolism sufficiently to pump blood through 50 feet of muscular coils. The Sarajevo fossil site reveals this ancient world in remarkable detail. Layer after layer contains plant fossils that speak to incredible biodiversity and productivity. There are giant turtle shells, some the size of small tables. Early crocodilian relatives with broad, crushing teeth suggest they fed on hard-shelled prey rather than being the sleek, fast-moving predators we see today. This was not a clear, fast-flowing river system. Instead, it was a humid swamp rainforest, characterized by murky, slow-moving water, tangled root systems, and incredibly dense vegetation. Visibility would have been severely limited, with sound muffled by constant precipitation and the buzzing of countless insects. In such an environment, enormous size could actually be a tremendous advantage. A giant snake could lurk in the water with its bulk supported by buoyancy, its body concealed by tannin-stained currents. The heat and humidity would keep its muscles warm and responsive, allowing it to move explosively when necessary, then remain motionless for weeks or months while digesting enormous meals. Titanoboa in this context wasn't some biological accident. It was the direct, logical outcome of an extreme world that provided high temperatures, abundant prey, and a swampy labyrinth perfectly suited for slow, patient ambush hunting. So how exactly did this prehistoric giant hunt? Forget everything you've seen in movies about giant snakes. Titanoboa wasn't some hyper-aggressive monster chasing prey across land. This wasn't a land-racing python or a tree-dwelling boa. At over 40 feet in length, Titanoboa was simply too massive for that kind of activity. 40-plus feet of solid muscle doesn't glide quickly over forest floors. It sinks into soft ground, drags against obstacles, and fights gravity with every movement. But in water, the entire dynamic changes completely. In the Paleocene swamps, Titanoboa behaved less like a modern snake and more like a massive crocodile. It moved slowly, silently, remaining half-submerged for extended periods. It used the swamp's murky water as perfect camouflage, slipping between fallen logs and complex root systems, while creating only the faintest disturbance on the water's surface. For an animal of this incredible size, invisibility wasn't just a hunting technique, it was an entire lifestyle. Titanoboa didn't chase prey, and it didn't sprint after potential meals. Instead, it waited. Hours, maybe days, remaining almost completely motionless until something wandered close enough to strike range. When it finally did strike, the force was absolutely terrifying. Biomechanical models estimate that Titanoboa could exert well over 400 pounds per square inch of constriction pressure, more than enough force to instantly crush a crocodile's ribcage. While modern boas and pythons rely primarily on restricting blood flow to subdue their prey, at Titanoboa's size, the distinction becomes academic. The crushing force alone was devastating. Based on the ecosystem preserved at Cerrejón, Titanoboa's diet likely included several types of prey. Giant turtles were probably a favorite. They moved slowly, were abundant in the environment, and were packed with calories, making them perfect targets for an ambush predator. Early crocodilians, which were smaller than Titanoboa and hadn't yet evolved into the apex predators we know today, would have been vulnerable. Large fish were common in the river systems and easy to catch in confined channels. There were possibly early mammals as well, though mammals were still relatively small during the Paleocene period. Any that ventured too close to the water's edge would have become fair game. Water wasn't just Titanoboa's hunting ground. It was absolutely essential for its survival. The buoyancy of water supported its massive weight, without which it would have struggled to move efficiently on land. Its internal organs would have been compressed by its own body mass, making breathing difficult, digestion slow, and movement exhausting. Perhaps most importantly, water helped regulate its body temperature. Snakes absorb heat from their surroundings, and in the sweltering Paleocene climate, water provided a way to cool down when necessary, while still maintaining the high metabolic rate needed to sustain such an enormous body. So when you imagine Titanoboa, don't picture it slithering across land like some nightmare serpent from a movie. Instead, picture it gliding silently through dark water, with only its eyes above the surface, waiting with infinite patience for the perfect moment to strike with devastating force. If Titanoboa was such a successful predator, perfectly adapted to its environment and dominating its ecosystem, why isn't it still around today? The answer is both elegant and tragic. The world changed, and Titanoboa couldn't adapt quickly enough to survive. After the Paleocene epoch, Earth began to cool. At first, the change was gradual, but then it accelerated. Average global temperatures dropped by several degrees Celsius over the course of just a few million years. For an ectothermic giant like Titanoboa, this climate shift was essentially a death sentence. Here's the fundamental problem with being cold-blooded. Your metabolism is directly tied to environmental temperature. When temperatures drop, your metabolic rate slows dramatically. Digestion takes much longer, movement becomes sluggish, and growth rates plummet. For a creature as large as Titanoboa, this metabolic slowdown was catastrophic. A snake of this size needed enormous quantities of food just to maintain its body mass. But with a slower metabolism caused by cooler temperatures, it couldn't hunt as effectively. It couldn't digest prey quickly enough to meet its energy needs, and it couldn't grow large enough to compete successfully with other predators. Essentially, Titanoboa starved in slow motion as the world cooled around it. But temperature wasn't the only factor driving Titanoboa to extinction. The entire ecosystem was undergoing dramatic transformation. Mammals, which had been relatively small and ecologically insignificant during the age of dinosaurs, were beginning to diversify rapidly and grow larger. Crucially, mammals were warm-blooded, which meant they could remain active and competitive even when temperatures dropped. They were increasingly competing for the same resources that giant reptiles depended on. Meanwhile, the lush, swampy rainforests of the Paleocene were drying out as the climate changed. River systems became more seasonal rather than maintaining year-round flow. The dense, humid environment that Titanoboa had evolved to thrive in was literally disappearing from the landscape. Perhaps most importantly, other large reptiles were also dying out during this period. The giant turtles that had been easy prey, the massive crocodilians, and other components of the food web. The entire ecological network that supported Titanoboa was collapsing as the climate changed. Titanoboa didn't die from predation, disease, or competition with other species. It died because the planet cooled by just a few degrees. That's all it took. A relatively small shift in global climate, and the largest snake that ever lived simply stopped existing. This should give us pause, because climate doesn't just influence ecosystems. It fundamentally defines the upper and lower limits of what life forms are even possible. Titanoboa was, in many ways, a creature that should never have existed. It was too big, too heavy, and too dependent on a very specific set of environmental conditions that were always destined to change. But for a brief moment in Earth's history, probably lasting several million years, all the conditions aligned perfectly. The temperature was right, the prey was abundant, and the environment was ideal. For that geological instant, the largest snake that ever lived ruled the swamps of ancient South America with absolute authority. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared in the fossil record, it vanished, leaving behind only scattered bones and countless questions about the nature of life in extreme environments. The story of Titanoboa teaches us something profound about the relationship between life and climate. It shows us that even the most successful, perfectly adapted creatures can be vulnerable to environmental change. It reminds us that the conditions we consider normal today are just one snapshot in a constantly changing planetary system. When we look at Titanoboa's fossilized remains, we're not just seeing the bones of an ancient predator. We're looking at evidence of a world so different from our own that it stretches our imagination. We're seeing proof that Earth's climate has varied dramatically throughout history, creating opportunities for life forms that seem impossible by today's standards. The discovery of Titanoboa also highlights the incredible detective work that paleontologists do. From a handful of vertebrae extracted from a coal mine, scientists were able to reconstruct not just the size and behavior of this ancient giant, but also the environmental conditions that made its existence possible. They could read the story of an entire ecosystem from scattered fossil evidence. This research has implications that extend far beyond paleontology. Understanding how past climate changes affected large reptiles helps us predict how ongoing climate change might affect modern ecosystems. It provides data points for climate models and helps us understand the complex relationships between temperature, biodiversity, and evolutionary success. The Sarajevo coal mine continues to yield incredible discoveries, painting an ever more detailed picture of Paleocene ecosystems. Each new fossil adds another piece to the puzzle, helping scientists understand not just individual species like Titanoboa, but entire ecological communities and how they responded to environmental change. What's particularly fascinating is how Titanoboa challenges our assumptions about the limits of animal size. We tend to think of modern ecosystems as representing some kind of biological maximum, but Titanoboa proves that under different conditions, life can achieve scales that seem impossible today. It makes us wonder what other giants might be hiding in the fossil record, waiting to be discovered. The story also demonstrates the importance of preserving fossil sites and supporting paleontological research. The Sarajevo mine could easily have been exploited purely for its coal resources, with the incredible scientific treasures it contains being destroyed in the process. The collaboration between mining companies and researchers that made the Titanoboa discovery possible serves as a model for how industrial development and scientific research can coexist productively. As we face our own period of rapid climate change, the story of Titanoboa serves as both a warning and a source of wonder. It warns us that even the most successful species can be vulnerable to environmental shifts. But it also fills us with awe at the incredible diversity of life that our planet has supported throughout its history. The next time you see a snake, even a large A1, like an anaconda or python, remember that they are the diminished descendants of creatures like Titanoboa. They carry in their DNA the genetic legacy of giants that once ruled steaming prehistoric swamps under skies that never knew winter. Titanoboa represents a triumph of paleontological detective work, a window into deep time, and a reminder that our planet has harbored wonders beyond our wildest imagination. It lived in a world so alien to our experience that it might as well have been on another planet entirely. And perhaps that's the most remarkable thing about Titanoboa. It proves that Earth itself has been many different worlds throughout its long history. The calm, temperate planet we know today is just the latest chapter in a much longer, stranger story filled with giants we can barely comprehend. For millions of years, the largest snake that ever lived glided through primordial waters, a perfect predator in a perfect environment. Its reign ended not with violence or competition, but with the simple, inexorable cooling of the world around it. In the end, even giants must bow to the power of climate change. If you found this journey into prehistoric Colombia as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue exploring the incredible stories hidden in Earth's deep history. There are so many more amazing discoveries waiting to be uncovered, and I can't wait to share them with you. The bones of Titanoboa continue to teach us about life, death, and the ever-changing nature of our planet. They remind us that we live in an extraordinary world, one that has been home to creatures beyond our wildest dreams. And who knows, there might be even more incredible discoveries waiting in the rocks beneath our feet, ready to once again revolutionize our understanding of what life on Earth has been capable of achieving. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of one of paleontology's most spectacular discoveries. Until next time, keep wondering, keep questioning, and keep exploring the incredible story of life on our amazing planet.